Hi everyone and welcome to today's session. So we're going to be looking at action planning, thinking about how you can develop your research project ideas. So let's jump into the content for the session. Really as an outcome, we're going to explore what research studies aim to achieve and really get you thinking about the opportunities that research will offer you. How we can think about measuring the impact, and this has come up in various conversations this year, but always comes up in conversations in the past of like, what are we actually measuring as a result? And you can measure lots of things. So we want to talk about those opportunities that exist just to help you as you're planning that process going forward. We're going to explore data and reports to identify the need in the first place. So you might have an area of interest that you're keen to develop, but also how do we marry that up to the school needs and of course the student needs in the classroom. And then finally, we'll take a look at planning your approach. And in the Shobi group, I've put in there an action plan for you to utilize in your own time, just to pull together some of these aspects and thought processes for you to use throughout the session. Now, I'm going to highlight as well throughout this, there's going to be a Padlet wall that I'm going to direct you to throughout the recording today for you to actually take some time to reflect. This is not going to be a 2-hour me deliver to you session. There'll be times when the video is not on and I need you to just actually reflect on what we've talked about in your own time and to share some of those ideas, but in a shared space so that you can kind of pick up the thoughts and ideas of other people as well that might be considering doing something along the same lines as you. It's not to say that you copy each other's research, but obviously there's a fantastic power in having discussions around similar topics to just sort of bounce ideas off people that are looking at something that you might also be looking at. So what does research aim to achieve? Well, first of all, you need to measure the impact of what it is you are doing. This can be both positive and negative. And what I mean is it's not that we're aiming for it to be negative, but as mentioned in last week's session around the module in general, it might be that you try something that doesn't work. And from a research point of view, that is as positive as something that does work, because it proves to us that we don't need to continue trying that, because we've proved that in our situation it's not having any impact. So therefore, why would you continue trying to do something that doesn't have an impact? So really just front and center in everything that you're doing. Don't be put off by the fact that it doesn't work. I've had students in the past that have emailed me midway through their project panicking that they've tried something and it hasn't worked. And they need to change their question, and you don't. You need to understand why it didn't work, and obviously create that as a conclusion and a recommendation going forward. So again, please don't feel that whatever you choose to do over your 4 weeks has to have the greatest impact on learning and teaching ever. It's not that. It's a research project that looks at whether it does have an impact or not. So really, really important. And the final thing to mention on this part is that it's not just about student achievement at any point. It really is a lot broader than that. Student achievement is one measure of success, but there are many other measures of success. So on that note, I want you to take to the Padlet wall now, and you'll find the link within Edpuzzle, to go to that and find and discuss some other areas, other ideas that you could measure your impact of your project. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to share some of those ideas and looked around that Padlet wall. And again, depending on when you're viewing this, there may be more or less. I would urge you, if you've done this quite early in the week, to jump back into that Padlet wall and have a look at how some of those other thoughts have developed, and the areas that you might have added in. Someone might have added additional thoughts to that. So it's there as a live Padlet wall for you to really build on. So some of the things then. What are your perceived outcomes of this project? Now, this is important in 2 ways. One, what you don't want to do is lead your research from a biased point of view, i.e., I kind of already think that this is going to have an impact, so I'm going to lead my research down that route. But at the same time, it is also useful to consider what you think the outcome is going to be, but don't lead that as the outcome. Hopefully that makes sense. What we're saying really is, if you have a strong belief that music has an impact on students' understanding of maths, and you go into this research project, in your head, absolutely categorically clear that this is going to work, it can cloud your judgment of the feedback that you receive in terms of the impact. So yes, definitely, what do you think is going to be the impact, but always kind of underline that think. You don't know until you've done the project. And equally, at that point, it might just not work in the situation you're in with the learners you have at the time you have them. It could work with other people. So remembering to keep this quite broad and open. And then kind of linking to the literature review, and we talked about this briefly before, but also for you to consider, where this sits in with your project. It's once you've decided on your topic, what literature is there to support the views that you already have? So if you have that view of music and numeracy, have you read something about that? And what does that reading say? And has there been any other project around those issues? So really starting to identify at this point what literature you can find. And again, considering this from an assignment point of view in the limited word that you've got, we're not after the whole assignment being the literature review, but we're definitely asking to see, what's your start point? Because at this point you won't have a defined question. You shouldn't have a defined question, but you might have a very broad question around something that you're interested in looking at. And again, using the action planning document that we've referred to in Shobi, please use that to just help you plan out what it is you're hoping to achieve. So we're going to move on now to kind of thinking about where do we define the issue from? So we're going to take a look at some data sets. And again, I'm going to challenge you to do this remotely. We ordinarily would have done this face-to-face with some documents in the class. I'm going to ask you to have a look at these and just, again, share some of those thoughts and ideas. But we're going to have a look at how we can identify any emerging themes that might come from a school development plan. So the data sets that you're going to look at, they are dated now. They are old versions from training sets that we've used. But equally, it is just about analysing the data to look at what questions you might have as a result of the data. Not that the data shows you an end point, but the data is the start point of the next phase of discussion. So we'll have a look at some of these, but we'll also start to consider some of the external data sources that you can use. So I'm going to ask you, we say 1 minute to have a look. What we're saying is just your initial thought should be, what do you see in the data that just stands out as an obvious thing? And we want you to, again, share those thoughts within the Padlet wall. And again, it is there, other people will have shared their thoughts. It's not an idea of, there's a right answer or a wrong answer. I just want you to start to have that discussion space, because we are doing this asynchronously, to be able to see what other people's thinkings are on this. And if someone has raised a point that you disagree with, challenge them, put something in to say, oh, actually, I think that it shows this instead. It's just a useful way for you to unpick those things. And really, how does that data then allow you to answer any questions you have about the problems that might be in the school? So again, I'm kind of asking you to have a look as a whole group to see what other people have thought, and really what sort of solutions could you come up with. Again, it really is, we're using Padlet to kind of embody that discussion that might take place in the classroom, but obviously in this situation, we're not able to actually facilitate it in the classroom. So take some time, have a look at the documents. I'm going to put them up on the screen in a second. It's a useful time for you to pause the video so that you can have that data set up on the screen. I'm not going to talk over the data because that's what I want you to use, but I'm going to put up 2 sets of data. Choose one that you want to look at. Obviously, when you're recording on Padlet, talk about which one you've looked at, and then we'll pick up on each other's discussions within that. So this is data set 1. So this is, again, just a brief overview. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Again, just pause the video if you need to at this point. There are different data sets. Apologies, it's slightly blurred on there, but you can see sort of the general figures. And we're looking at the charts really to have a look at general trends on what's taken place. And this then is data set 2. So again, just looks at a similar thing, but the data is slightly different. Okay, so the clear thing is that data does only tell us part of the story, and we should avoid relying solely on data to give us next steps in what we might want to do to understand the whole picture. For instance, I could give you data now that says 75% of X, Y, or Z is successful, but if that data relies on only 4 people being part of that study, 75% is a kind of clouded judgment, because actually one person is 25%, which therefore one person carries a big weighting. And this is something we see quite a lot in schools. If there are small class sizes, each individual student can carry as much as 7 to 8%. And that is a huge difference. When one person might underperform, it can skew the whole data. So again, data is useful, but as a starting point to build the rest of the picture. So what is it that we can use outside of simple data from testing to support us with that next part of the journey? What we're going to do here in this activity is start to think about your placement school and their most recent Estin report, and start to think about what the data tells you. So there is a link on the screen here, or you can simply just search for mylocalschool.wales.gov.uk. And what I want you to do is spend some time just thinking about the overall summary and the recommendations for that school. It's going to pick up the data that you've looked at previously. So hopefully, that's given you an insight into how to read that data and what to do with it. And just identify for yourselves some of the key things that Estin has recognised that you might want to do differently. So again, we're engaging in additional data. This is obviously from reports and observations of schools through an inspection process, not just relying on the data, but also the face-to-face kind of interrogation of what that looks like in the school. And I want you to, within Edpuzzle this time, just give some overview responses to what you think is needed in the school, how you've interpreted that feedback from Estin, and what that could do to get you thinking about where your research project might sit within the needs of the school. Okay, so hopefully that's been of use in terms of supporting you with understanding the school-specific needs. Again, there's a lot on those sites around the data collection for schools and what they would have. And hopefully you've started to have a look at what impact that might have on your decisions going forward as to how your project might sit in. And again, I'd urge you to consider that although they might not say music is an issue or PE is an issue or any of those things are an issue, you can be creative at this point to think about, well, I personally believe that PE might have an impact on literacy, so therefore the school and Estin have highlighted literacy as an issue. I'm going to explore maybe how PE can impact on that issue. So you're still meeting the needs of the school through the school development plan, through Estin, through the data, but you're considering an alternative approach. And obviously, unfortunately, there's the added issue of thinking about how can you do that through a blended learning approach. So you're kind of looking at two things in terms of the impact piece. But what we also want to do is have a look at, you've done your literature review, or you've considered that a literature review is important in terms of your reading of theory-based approaches to whatever it is you're looking at. But also there is ongoing research all the time about impact on different things. So what we want to do is to think about this from a critical point of view. Beyond the literature, what other research exists to support your area of interest? And for this, we're going to take a look at the Education Endowment Fund website, which hopefully you've looked at before, but we're going to look at it from a slightly different point of view here. So I'm going to ask you to go to this website in a second. And again, this is a time activity. You can have all the time you need to do this. This is asynchronous, so feel free to use the time. I want you to go to that website and choose one of the toolkits to look at, and they can be found underneath each of the evidence summary pages. And just read the case study. So what was the problem the school faced? What was the intervention? And then what did they do as a result? And obviously some of them are ongoing, some of them have been completed. So there's different levels of impact, conclusions, etc. But what I want you to do is on an individual basis, just think about what would you consider as a response to those things. And actually, if you can find something which is quite close to what you're passionate about doing in your own research, how would you take some of the findings that you've read about from the Education Endowment Foundation and what you can use that for? Because that's the important thing really, is how we can link up our research. It might be being done in one school in one way, but done differently in a different school and done the way. So you're supporting the field of inquiry in terms of building that level of knowledge. So just as a quick overview for that, let's jump into that Education Endowment section. And just to have a look at some of those things that you can look at. So we're very keen to have a look at those toolkits that you can use to explore things. The website, if you've never been on it before, is really, really powerful. Lots and lots of things that you can look into. And again, from that point of view of what's happening currently, there are some readings that you might want to do around the blended learning approach. I specifically want you to have a look at this teaching and learning toolkit. And you'll see here that there are things that you can filter for all sorts of things. So, what is the impact of arts participation? And it tells you about the cost, tells you about those things. But if you go into any one of them, and again, you can choose the ones that you want, it's going to give you the overview of the impact. Okay, and again, this is one overview of lots of studies, of costs, etc., that you can review for each of those things. And lots of details in here, obviously, that you can think about. And also, what I think would be very beneficial is in your own time to have a look at some of the other projects. So they're all based around the same content, but they're different projects with very much different outcomes. So really, it's a chance for you to kind of just have a look through those approaches that you think are aligned to your thinking, and just have a review of what the impact might be and what you would do with that information. Okay, so we've kind of come to the end of this part where hopefully you've been able to engage in some of the thought process around what you're trying to measure. We've had a look at how you might measure it in terms of what categories, be it student participation, engagement. It could be, developing a deeper understanding, all of those different ways that you might measure the impact. We now want to start you thinking, and you're going to use the action planning document that's in Shobi for this, to start thinking of that list of data or resources you might need to inform your own inquiry. So what is it that you're going to have to do? And this is obviously part of your directed learning, to go and find those things and start to build up your own literature portfolio that's going to support you in your project. We also want you to kind of discuss with other people, with your peers, also potentially with your PAC tutor, why the wider variables are important. So not just the initial data, but also, looking at the fact that we've got students that might be having well-being issues, that might have limited access at home. These are things to consider specifically as part of your project. So that deeper understanding. And again, always sort of thinking about using that Education Endowment Foundation website to really help you with the approach that you might take. And we'll pick up these sort of, in future sessions. But thinking about that, what is the problem? What is the thing that I'm going to measure? What is my approach to doing this? And then what is the impact? Ultimately, you've got to consider the impact. So take some time to really think about those things. Take some time to document that on your action plan. Just as a heads up, if I jump to the action plan section on Shobi, just so you can see what it is I'm talking about, it's under the action planning section here. And within your project, I've given some overall notes here that just talks about what we've mentioned in this session, and then this is an action plan that you can download, or you can draw direct on Shobi if you've got the access to that. And really, it just talks about what are the things that I need to do. So again, we talked about hypothesis, this idea that what do you think is going to happen, and again, it's what you think, not what you know. You might have a very passionate view that it will make a difference, but at this point, until you've done the project, you don't know if it makes a difference with those people. Thinking about your methodology, what's your approach? What is the data that you think you're going to need to collect? What way are you going to analyze that data? And then, when are these things going to take place for you? So, these are kind of more project-based things around the assessment. You have a very specific timeline because you're going out on the 9th of November. But, you can start to do certain things in advance of that. One of them, obviously, being contacting the school and finding out some of their background information about the potential students you might be working with. This is personal to you. Obviously, you can share it with your PAC tutor. Feel free to share it with each other if you want to. But really, it's just there as just an action plan checklist to just keep you on track throughout the module as you start to plan those things. So that's it for the input for this session. Please do get in touch with me if you have any questions about anything. please at this point, consider the stage you should be. It's week 1 of the module. We're not after the finished question at this point. However, it is useful to start having a broad question that we can refine. I would urge you to also have a look at that ethics process, just so that it doesn't sort of strike you later on. We are going to need to have those questions before we allow you to go out. So those documentations are going to need to go through. Again, I'm just going to jump to Shobi to just look at where that exists. So under the second session on here on ethics, there is an overview of the ethics process. So we do talk through, what is required. And like I said, this is a link to the low risk ethic form that you do need to fill in, and everybody needs to fill it in. And like I said, I have filled in a lot of those sections for you. One thing to add in here, your chief investigator is your PAC tutor. So just to highlight that, I filled in these sections because that is standard. You will need to change your start date and end date, obviously, because that's an ongoing change thing each year. But the red sections are things where we need your detail. Okay, so we need to know what it is you're actually looking at, and this specifically here, and can change your project title. Down here, really what we've looked at today is what are the things that you feel you're going to need to look at. So it talks about this brief outline. Now, it feels like it's additional work because there's a lot of writing that's going to go into this. This actually can formulate the start of your assignment. So this fundamentally is chapter 1 of your book, the overview, the rationale, why you're doing it, where you're going to be working, etc. So as you build this, and this doesn't have to be done today, this has to be done before you go out on placement, this is almost chapter 1. So if you think about this to be something between 250 to 500 words, you can just lift that and place that in your assignment for us. And again, it just goes through, it's very detailed, but I've tried to highlight the things that are very important for you to be able to fill in. Again, the consent forms are attached in Shobi. You'll be able to find those things. This is just about the information sheet that's going to go to the head teacher of the school to say what it is you're planning on doing. Again, just the document is there. You just need to adapt it and send it out. And the rest of it really is, go through it, but it's really about that overview of making sure that everybody is safe. We know that this is a low risk. We know already it's a low risk, and we've engaged the head teacher of the school to talk about this. But we do need to make sure that these things are filled in. Again, this is bespoke to you. If you are doing questionnaires, are you going to be making sure they're anonymous so that you're just looking at the data as opposed to that person individually and not developing that? But you might not all be doing questionnaires, so therefore I haven't filled this in for you. And again, just going to go through different things. Again, I filled in some of these things. You are presenting it as an ebook, so it can be disseminated to the wider community. But again, you might need to add in some of these sections if you're using them. And then finally, we do need you to sign it, and then we will be signing it as your supervisors as well. So again, this is the kind of final step that will take place during your PAC meetings prior to you going out on your placements. So again, nothing to worry about at this point, but very useful to have a look at where it is. And again, these are all adaptable documents that you can change should you need to use them. So thanks for listening. Hopefully that's supported you in that approach to your action planning. Please do get in touch if you need anything. I'll be available to answer any questions via email, or just put those questions on Shobi, because again, they might be questions that everybody has that's fair to share with everybody. And again, some of these has happened. So within the class discussion, we'll see that other people have already started asking those questions, and they may be valid questions for everybody. So feel free to ask your questions in there, and then my response goes to everybody as a result, as opposed to them being an individual email conversation. So thanks again, and I will see you all next week.